This was the summer of 1986 at Cedar Hollow Lake, a state campground about 2 hours from our house. We went every July. My wife, Donna, and I had been bringing the kids since Kevin was in diapers, and our daughter, Amy, who was 8 that year, had never known a summer without it. Site 14, same as always, tucked back near the tree line where the noise from the boat ramp couldn't reach us. We'd pulled in on a Friday afternoon in the station wagon, wood paneling baking in the sun, the back loaded with the canvas tent, the Coleman lantern, the aluminum cooler, and a thermos that never left Donna's side. Kevin had his fishing tackle box wedged between 2 sleeping bags. Amy had brought her Holly Hobby sleeping bag and a stack of comic books that would be soggy by Sunday, like always. We set up camp the way we always did. Tent first, lawn chairs second, lantern hung from the low branch by 6 o'clock. Donna wrote our names in the campground's handwritten register at the little host cabin near the entrance, the way you were supposed to. The campground host, an older man named Russ, who'd been running that place since before I was born, waved at us from his porch and told us the fish were biting near the North Cove. Everything was normal, right up until Saturday morning when the man with the clipboard showed up. He said his name was Dale Pruitt and that he worked for the county as a water quality technician. He had on a gray collared shirt with a patch on the shoulder that said something about the Department of Natural Resources, and he carried a metal case that looked like a toolbox, along with the clipboard. He told us he was testing lake water at different campsites because of some algae concerns upstream. "Won't take but a few minutes," he said. "Just need to walk down to your section of shoreline." Donna offered him coffee. He said, "No, thank you, ma'am," real polite, and that's when he looked past her to Kevin, sitting by the fire ring cleaning his rod, and said his name, called him Kevin, told him to move his tackle box. I asked him how he knew my son's name. He laughed a little and tapped his clipboard. "Got it written right here. Site 14. Kevin, Amy, Donna, and..." He looked at me and paused just a second too long. "And you'd be the father." I told him my name. He wrote it down without looking at the paper. I noticed that. He kept his eyes on us the whole time he wrote, like he already knew what he was writing. I told myself it was in the campground register. Russ probably filled these county fellas in when they came through. That's what I told myself. He walked down to the water, dipped a little glass vial in, capped it, and was gone in under 10 minutes. Just like he said. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Sunday, we came back from a morning hike to find our lunch cooler sitting on the picnic table instead of in the shade under the table where Donna always kept it. Nothing was taken. The sandwiches were still wrapped, but it had been moved, and none of us had moved it. Amy said, "Maybe the raccoon did it." Raccoons don't set coolers on tables. Raccoons knock them over. That afternoon, Kevin's tackle box was rearranged. He noticed before I did, because he was the kind of kid who kept his lures in a particular order, lightest to darkest, top tray to bottom. He came to me looking confused and said somebody had swapped his spinner baits into the wrong compartment. "Maybe you did it and forgot," I said, because that felt easier than the alternative. "I didn't, Dad." I believed him. I just didn't want to. Monday morning, Dale Pruitt came back. He said he needed a second sample, this time from farther down the shoreline, past our site, near where the trees got thick. He asked if it would be all right if he came through our site again to get there, since it was the shortest path. I said sure, not knowing what else to say to a man with a county patch on his shirt. While he was walking down, he asked Donna, easy as anything, whether Amy still had nightmares. Donna about dropped her thermos. "How would you know that?" she asked him. He smiled and said something about how all little ones get nightmares camping, first night away from home and all. But Amy hadn't had a nightmare that trip. She'd had one once, back in April, in her own bed at home. Donna had mentioned it to exactly nobody outside our house, That was the moment I stopped believing this man worked for the county. I didn't say anything to Donna in front of the kids. That night, after Amy and Kevin were asleep in the tent, I told her what I was thinking. She'd already been thinking it too. "He knows things he shouldn't know," she said. "Little things, like he's been listening." We started paying attention differently after that. Not scared exactly, not yet. Watchful. Tuesday, I walked down to the host cabin and asked Russ if he knew a water quality technician named Dale Pruitt. Russ said the county did send a fella out sometimes, but he didn't know the name and nobody had told him to expect a visit that week. He said he'd ask around. That evening, our old campground map, the free paper one they hand out at the gate with the trail loops marked on it, went missing from the picnic table. We'd had it pinned under a rock all week. Gone. Wednesday morning, Amy found it, tucked halfway under our tent flap. I remember crouching down to pick it up more than I remember almost anything else from that week, because of how it was folded. Amy always folded that map the same exact way, the way her grandmother had taught her, back and forth on itself in neat little accordion pleats, small enough to fit in her shorts pocket. This one came back folded in half, then in half again, straight down the middle. A grown man's fold, a fold that had never once come out of Amy's hands. I held it up to Donna without saying anything and watched her face change when she understood what she was looking at. Somebody had taken it, opened it, studied it, and put it back the way a stranger folds paper, not the way our daughter did. It wasn't the map that scared us, it was the fold. I asked Amy if she'd seen anyone near the tent. She said, "Just the nice waterman. He waved at me by the bathrooms yesterday. He knew I liked the trail with the wooden bridge." I hadn't told anybody which trail was Amy's favorite. Donna hadn't either. It was just something we knew as a family, something Amy mentioned at breakfast sometimes, nothing anyone would write on a clipboard. That's when the fear stopped being quiet. Wednesday afternoon, I took Kevin down to the boat ramp to look for the white pickup Russ had mentioned. I didn't tell him why. I just said we were going for a walk. We didn't find the truck, but we found something else. An elderly couple from Site 22, the Hendersons, sitting at their picnic table looking rattled. Mrs. Henderson told us a man in a gray shirt had stopped by their site that morning asking about erosion patterns near the shoreline and had asked, out of nowhere, whether they had any grandchildren visiting that week. They didn't. He wrote something down anyway, thanked them, and walked off toward the tree line instead of toward the water, which struck Mrs. Henderson as backward for a man supposedly checking erosion. I asked what he looked like. "Medium height," she said. "Sandy hair, maybe 40. Polite voice. Carried a clipboard and a metal case. Same man." That evening, I found our old Polaroid camera sitting on top of the cooler instead of zipped inside Donna's tote bag where she always kept it. Inside, there was one photo missing from the cardboard box we stored the developed pictures in. Just one. A shot Donna had taken 2 days earlier of the kids standing by the fire ring, both of them grinning, Kevin holding up a bluegill he'd caught that morning. Donna counted the photos twice. She wasn't wrong. It was gone. That was the thing that finally scared me more than anything else, right up until the next night. Somebody hadn't just been watching us. Somebody had taken a piece of us home with him. Thursday, Russ came by our site looking troubled. He said he'd called the county office that morning from the payphone outside the camp store, and they told him there was no employee named Dale Pruitt, no water testing scheduled for Cedar Hollow that summer at all. He said the woman on the phone sounded concerned enough that she was going to notify the sheriff's department. I asked Russ if he'd actually seen the man's truck. Russ said he had, parked near the boat ramp 2 different days. A plain white pickup, no county markings on the door, which Russ said struck him as odd at the time, but he hadn't thought much of it because the man had a laminated ID card and a clipboard, and people don't usually question a clipboard. We decided that night we'd pack up early and leave in the morning, instead of waiting for our planned Saturday departure. I didn't want to scare the kids, so I told them we were leaving a little early, because a storm was coming in. Kevin, sharp as always, looked at the clear evening sky and didn't believe me, but he didn't argue either. Around 10 that night, after the lantern was out and the kids were supposedly asleep, I heard something outside the tent. Slow steps, careful ones, the kind somebody takes when they don't want to be heard, but the leaves under their boots won't let them move silent. I unzipped the tent flap fast, flashlight up. The beam swung wide before it found him, and for a second, I almost missed it, almost swept right past. He was pressed flat against the outside of the tent wall, so close the nylon was bowing in around his shoulder, right where Amy's head was resting on her pillow on the other side of that thin sheet of fabric. He had the clipboard held up against the tent wall too, flat, like he was pressing it there on purpose, like he was taking some kind of measurement off the shape of my sleeping daughter. His face turned toward the light. I only saw it for a heartbeat, that same polite, unbothered expression he'd worn the whole week, like a man caught doing nothing wrong at all. Then he peeled back from the fabric, unhurried, and backed away into the dark toward the tree line, never once breaking eye contact with me until the trees took him. I didn't chase him. I couldn't make my legs do it. I stood there with the flashlight shaking in my hand, and Amy's breathing still slow and even on the other side of that wall, close enough that if I'd reached out, I could have touched the dent his shoulder had left in the fabric. Near the fire ring, in the dirt, there were fresh boot prints that hadn't been there an hour before, leading straight toward the tent and curving away again, back toward the trees. The same path he'd taken in the beam of my flashlight. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in a lawn chair outside the tent with the fire poker across my knees until the sky started turning gray, and I didn't take my eyes off that dent in the nylon the whole time. We were loading the station wagon before 6 the next morning when Russ came jogging up from the host cabin, out of breath, saying the sheriff's deputies wanted to talk to us before we left. 2 deputies showed up within the hour. They walked our site, looked at the boot prints, which by then were half erased by morning dew, and asked us a lot of questions about the man's appearance, his truck, what he'd said. One of the deputies got quiet when I mentioned the clipboard pressed flat against the tent, right by where my daughter had been sleeping. He told us that back in the spring, 2 other campgrounds about 40 miles from Cedar Hollow had reported a similar man. Different fake job both times, he said. Once a fella claiming to inspect fire pits for safety violations. Once a man saying he worked for the electric company checking lines near the campsites. Both times, families with young kids. Both times, the man vanished before anybody could get a good look at him in daylight. And both times, families later realized he'd known small personal details he had no business knowing. Nobody had ever caught him. Nobody had ever figured out how he learned what he learned, or what he was after. The families who reported him never saw him again, but the deputy said that wasn't exactly comforting, since nobody could say for certain whether that meant he moved on, or just got smarter about not getting caught the next time. We drove home that morning without stopping for the diner breakfast we always got on the way out, the one with the good biscuits. Donna didn't say much the whole drive, neither did I. We never went back to Cedar Hollow. We told the kids it was because the campground got too crowded, which wasn't really a lie, just wasn't the truth either. Amy's 11 now. She doesn't remember most of it, or says she doesn't. Kevin remembers everything. Every so often he'll ask me if I think that man ever got caught, and I tell him I don't know because I don't. A few years back, I ran into somebody from our old church who mentioned they'd camped at Cedar Hollow the summer after ours, and that a stranger had approached them claiming to be doing a wildlife count, asking a few too many questions about their kids' bedtime. They hadn't thought much of it until I told them our story. Then they went quiet the same way the deputy did. I still have that campground map somewhere, folded in half, then in half again. Still wrong, still not the way my daughter would have done it. I keep it in a drawer I don't open much, and every so often I take it out just to look at that fold, because it's the closest thing I have to proof. Proof that for 1 week in 1986, a stranger stood close enough to press his hand flat against the wall of our tent while my children slept a few inches away, close enough to touch, and none of us ever heard him coming until it was almost too late. I still wonder, some nights, how many other families sat by a fire, welcomed a stranger with a clipboard, and never found out until it was almost too late that somebody had been learning them, piece by piece, long before he ever said a word.